Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the July iteration of the Art House Convergence membership meeting. As you know, we started doing these topically. And so July, we're talking about build outs. It's something that's been discussed a little bit in the Google group lately. And I know that a lot of folks over the course of COVID and in the last couple of years have made a lot of really big changes to their facilities and are looking for different ways to explore what's the options are and what's out there. But as most of us are operating on a shoestring though, and with tight budgets. And so we're going to talk about what the possibilities are and what challenges everyone is facing. And so we are joined today by Stephen Krams and Barbara Twist, and I will have them join us here in just a second. Hi, guys. We'll be joined shortly, hopefully, by Barack as well. And we're going to talk about the different projects you guys have going on. Everyone here has kind of disparate projects, so I'm really curious to hear about what you have going on. Stephen, if it's okay with you, would you start us off and tell us about yourself and what you're working on at the Terra?
The Tara Theater was operated by Regal for a number of years and other operators previous to that, going back to the 1960s when Lowe's built the theater. It was built as a single screen theater, and now it's a 4-screen theater. It contains large auditoriums with big screens. It's about a 20-some-odd thousand square foot facility for the 4 screens with a big lobby. And I am partnered with a gentleman here in town who runs the Plaza Theater. I'm sure some of you may know that theater as well, Christopher Escobar. And so we have just opened the theater up. It's been open about a month. We're tonight actually doing a special screening of Oppenheimer in 70 millimeter, because we've installed 70 millimeter equipment in the theater and 35 millimeter gear besides digital. And it's been an exciting project from the beginning until this moment. And I'm involved in other projects as well. I'm the founder and the president of the Coral Gables Art Cinema in Miami. And I own Magnatech Electronic Company, which builds movie theaters and fits them out. So been in the business over 50 years. That gives you just a head start.
So you know a lot.
Well, there's a lot I don't know, believe me. I learn something every single day. I learned something yesterday that I never knew. They shipped Oppenheimer on double-sized reels, which I've never seen before or seen it done. And so our booth is only equipped with standard reels, and here we have these double-sized reels to deal with. So it was a challenge. I guess they're trying to save money.
Something new every day. Barbara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Barbara Twist. I work with Vidiots as the Director of Partnerships. I'm also the Executive Director of Film Festival Alliance and formerly with Art House Convergence. And so for Vidiots, we are a 2-screen 1929. Oh no, Mark Wojan is on here. He might correct me. 1928, late 1920s neighborhood movie theater that has been restored. We just opened at the beginning of June, and we are most well known for our video store collection, which Vidiots was founded in 1985 by 2 women, Patty and Kathy. Video store in Santa Monica, really some of the best independent films across the country. We had a massive collection, over 50,000 titles. That space was turned into a nonprofit in 2012, and then was shuttered its doors in Santa Monica in 2017 in the hopes of moving east and finding a location that had a movie theater screen. So our executive director, Maggie McKay, came on board in 2016 and is overseeing that process, the capital campaign, the finding the location. We are now at the Eagle Theater in Eagle Rock, which is in Northeast Los Angeles, kind of south of Glendale, north of Highland Park, and west of Pasadena. And so we reopened in June. We have a 271 seat theater, which has soon, actually thanks to Mark, we'll have 35 millimeter, 16 millimeter, and we have a 4K DCP in there. And then we have a micro cinema sort of flexible space that is 2K DCP, 35 seats that are flexible. So they're just more like orchestra chairs, and we can take those in and out of the space. And one of the walls is collapsible. And so when it's closed down, it actually is quite soundproof and a great viewing experience. And then it can also be opened up and turned into a classroom and things, different spaces like that. We're trying to do a lot of community events in there. And then right next to that is our video store collection, which is fully on the floor and has grown to 61,000 titles. And in June, we rented over 3,500 discs, and we actually beat several of our single day video rental, highest number of discs rented in a single day since we opened in 1985. So DVD is alive and well in Los Angeles.
Love to hear it. That's a conversation for another webinar, I think, the physical media discussion. Stephen and Barbara, you are both in these last projects are moving into pre-existing properties, correct? Can you tell me a little bit about how that informed what you were going to do with the space, and your approach to, I guess, funding it? Barbara, you talked a little bit about a capital campaign. Stephen, I know there was a fundraiser for the chair as well. You want to start us off, Stephen?
Yeah, well, I'm also, as I said, involved with the Coral Gables Art Cinema, and we're involved in a capital campaign there, a serious capital campaign. So we are involved in building a second auditorium, and that capital campaign has been going on and off for several years, but we were interrupted by the pandemic. But now we have secured all of our funding, and now it's down to just working with the city and the community, trying to get everybody's approvals and so forth. We're just about there. But that space was not a movie theater, neither the original Coral Gables Art Cinema or the space that we're using for the new auditorium. And fortunately, on my staff, I have an architect, designer, engineer, because we do this all the time. And we did some work pro bono for the city, and that's how this all got started. And it's different at the Tara. Of course, this was an existing 4-screen theater. Fortunately, when we moved into that space, Regal had not removed the seating, nor the screens, nor the speaker systems. So it made it kind of easy for us to come in and just load in the projection systems, rewire everything, and get everything up and running. Although at this very moment, as we speak, my staff is at the theater trying to get ready for a show of Oppenheimer tonight. They're cutting the aperture plates as we speak.
Well, since you've seen both sides, kind of this turnkey situation and having to outfit a space that was not originally intended to be a theater, as someone I used to help build out restaurants, and I found that the spaces that were not intended to be restaurants in the first place were actually easier because we could kind of start from scratch. What has been your experience?
Well, obviously, if you can start from scratch and design the space, build the space, which we do, that's really the easiest thing to do. But if you got 4 walls and you have a ceiling height which is reasonable, you can do almost anything. And so we have put theaters into the strangest of spaces over the years, whether it's a dinner theater or a small mini theater or a multiplex of 20 screens or more. So everyone is a challenge. Everyone is custom. No two are alike. The challenge is whether they come from the owners, the architects, the engineers, the municipalities that you're working in with various regulations. Each one stands on its own and is definitely a unique challenge. So, but I'd say the basics for an existing space are ceiling height and the shape of the room. If it's not exactly the way you want it to be, can you change the shape of that room to make it more conducive to be used as a cinema with a good viewing angle?
Barbara,
So
what
those are
about
the
Vidiots and the Eagle Theater?
Yeah, so Maggie did extensive research on like sort of a site that would make sense, and originally really felt that building out a non-theater space into a theater space made the most sense, right? Just as Stephen is saying, like having that flexibility. But then the Eagle Theater became available. And our mission is to be affordable, equitable, and accessible to all. And this is a neighborhood that did not have a cinema. It had a cinema up until the year 2000, which was the Eagle. And then it was turned into a church for about 20 years. And so it was already a space that could potentially work. It had a large storefront that had never been connected to the theater, but that was very enticing for us with the video store collection. And then there was this sense of community and neighborhood support that was already there. So it just sort of came at the right moment. So that was in the fall of 2019. Maggie signed that lease with construction due to start imminently and to open our doors in the summer of 2020. Obviously, it's 2023. So, the Eagle Theater was, when it was built, it was an 8 to 900 seat auditorium. And so it had a very, very tiny lobby. And, the auditorium itself was quite large, but in the intervening years, as it evolved from, a neighborhood cinema, it was a pussycat theater for a while, then it was a, sort of third run, like, 10 years after a movie's come out, it shows up there kind of thing. So it had seats that were actually in decent condition because they were used once a week for an hour. And it had, as Stephen is saying, it had the ceiling height, it had the bone structure. Other than that, we kept the seats and we kept the kind of architectural detailing and we didn't move any exterior walls. Everything else, essentially a gut renovation, not what was intended going into it, right? You go into it thinking like, how can we make this, for as little as possible, just get it up and running. But as you dug in, particularly working in the city of Los Angeles, there are just a lot of bureaucratic hurdles, a lot of safety issues. It had never had a fire sprinkler system in it. So that went in. It had a brand new HVAC system go in. We had to put in brand new electrical. We had to, and then by shrinking the auditorium so that we could get a lobby space that was large enough for a concession stand and a beer and wine bar, and just large enough to accommodate anyone in it. We shrunk the auditorium. Most people don't notice because it still feels quite large. We have about 15 feet in between the front row of our seats and the screen. So the front row is a great viewing experience. So the auditorium remains quite large. But in the process of that shrinking, right, like we had to regrade that floor, and then we had to build out the entire storefront. We also, our projection booth and second floor was extended as we expanded the lobby. So that was a completely new build. So our projection booth is a whole new space. But yeah, we started construction in June 2021 and then completed in May 2023. Well, complete, there's still little things that we're doing here and there. It's sort of an ever-evolving process. But the primary fundraising took place during the pandemic. So we raised, we're close to $3.5 million at this point. That was not just the renovation of the building, but also operation of the organization, since 2019. But I mean, really, it was money came in and then went immediately out to our general contractor. And so it was very like, just every dollar that came in has really been poured back into this space. We were fortunate. I spent a lot of time focused on in-kind donations. So we were able to get our 35 projectors primarily donated, our DCPs donated, sound equipment, those types of things. So we really hustled a lot on the in-kind donations, because also doing construction during the pandemic, everything went up, steel went up 10 times. The budgets that were prepared in 2019 just kind of got tossed out the window when we started in 2021. We ended up, I remember there's one moment where we had an electrical inspection that got pushed like 3 months because we were waiting on this one light that was like stuck on a shipping container in the Pacific Ocean. So just a lot of those challenges in building space, and then just some unexpected things from the city, expanding our standpipe for the fire department. So part of it is really building in a large cushion for unexpected things. Assume that anything bad that could happen with the city will happen to you, and then you'll be prepared for it.
For sure. For both of you, has the timeline that you all expected, were you able to work within that timeline for these projects, or is it kind of that also goes out the window with the budget the last couple of the years?
I mean, for us, it was not the timeline we expected. The budget, we are essentially where we landed budget-wise, where our first budget was. But Maggie worked really hard to cut that first budget down. And then basically it ballooned because of cost increases. So if we hadn't cut it down, our budget would have been significantly higher, and we wouldn't be at the point that we are with the project. But it did take a lot longer, really due to COVID had a huge impact on, shipping delays, and all of that was really troublesome for us.
Even how have you approached timelines?
The timeline for us was relatively short with the Tara, because we didn't take the theater over until December. But we didn't have that much to do. And so expenses were minimal, I would say. At the Coral Gables, the new project going on there, we even had a longer timeline to deal with. We started the project in 2017. Actually, I think I remember the first board meeting when we opened the first screen up in 2010, and I told the board, I said, if you think this is over now, you're sadly mistaken. This is just the beginning of this journey. Anyway, we started this part of the journey in 2017, and like so many others, and Barbara has shared with us, there are challenges without number. A lot from the city, a lot for funding, and of course, politics get in sometimes in the middle of things. So you had to deal with it all, and somehow you do manage it. We really were very fortunate that during the pandemic, our community really supported us and came out and donated a lot of money. And I would say, I don't know what the average is on our operations, for example. It's 50% of the income is donated income, and the balance comes from earned income. And the same can be said, I think, for a lot of 501s, that they really depend on those grants and those donations, and of course in kind and so forth. But really, at Coral Gables, the community really came out. The city came across with a $350,000 expenditure that they would put into the building. The theater is built in a city property in a parking garage, and so they take an interest in it. We have former mayor of the city is on our board, and so it really is an engaged community. Very much participation by so many different kinds of disciplines in the city, whether they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're accountants, people in the trade. And so as a consequence of that, you have a real connection. And so the money is there. We're just waiting to find a way to hook up our sewer line between the theater and the parking garage without interrupting the garage now, and then we'll move forward.
That segues a bit into a couple of the questions that I've received in the chat and via email. One being, who did you reach out to for in-kind donations? I know, Stephen, you mentioned you have an architect on staff. How
Well,
do you go about?
I'm in the business of supply of motion picture equipment. So everybody's looking at me. We need this, we need that, we want this, we want that. So you do what you can. And we did, and in the initial theater, we donated really everything that went in as far as fixed screen equipment was concerned. That was a donation from Magnatech. In this now the new adventure, we're doing all of the design, the engineering. One of our board members is a mechanical engineer, so he's doing all the electrical, the air conditioning. Is a lot of it is in kind, but there's a lot of cash involved as well. And so you have to get it from wherever you can. And if you're not prepared to let the community know what you want and reach out to them and connect to them so they know what you're trying to do and they feel part of it, it becomes pretty challenging. And we've had some successes and some times not so successful. In balance, it's been pretty good.
Yeah, for us, we've had I had the least amount of success with big box stores, right? Thinking like, oh, like a place like Home Depot, or Lowe's, not Home Depot. Lowe's would have, be able to make some sort of contribution, and they just don't. So it was really local businesses, like hitting up local hardware stores, that type of thing. We had success with Dunn Edwards, is a local California paint company, donated all of our paint, not our primer, but our paint. We just had like some really simple paint, but we got something like 60 gallons from them, which covered pretty much all of our paint needs. Fire Clay Tile in San Francisco, they donated all of our tile, which was, a little over $100,000 worth of tile. And so it allowed us to get all this really beautiful handmade tile in different colors. And so, each one of our bathrooms is monochromatic. And it was like a fun way that we could add color in the space from the architect's perspective, knowing that a lot of the other areas would have to be much simpler just due to budget. With carpet, we, we pursued as many avenues as possible. And so we ended up with, we were like, this is how much money we have. So the lobby has beautiful carpet, kind of the lobby and main. And then in the theater, we went with a really simple blue that matches, but is just, was more like off the rack, was like some, extra cuts that they had. With every vendor that we worked with, the first conversation was, we view this as a partnership. We are a nonprofit. Our budget is extremely limited. How can we work with you and support you, but also, we'll write you that tax donation letter. We'll shout you out on our socials. Like, we can do advertising in our cinema, how to make that happen. And so honestly, just letting a lot of companies know that we were a nonprofit usually resulted in some type of a donation. And then, as Stephen was saying, we also went out to our community on things like, we, knowing that not everyone has a DVD player anymore, that was something we wanted to have on site in the video store. So we went out to folks and said, do you have an old DVD player? When we needed iPads for our box office and concession stand, we went out and asked, old iPhones, iPods for scanners, and just put it out on our socials, and people had that stuff and they dropped it off. And so we were able to supply a lot of that smaller stuff through our local community. But then, we were hoping, being in Los Angeles, we had to create a new proscenium because our old proscenium was protected and then covered due to the smallness of it. The screen would have been too tiny. And so in the process of a new one, we thought, we might be able to take advantage of a studio or a production shop to fabricate that for us. And we pursued it in a couple different ways. And in the end, we just ended up, going with a company. But And then in terms of the equipment, we reached out to Dolby, to QSC. They both donated. And then the DCP projectors didn't come from a company, but they came from other theaters or organizations who were upgrading. And they kind of privately reached out to us from the LA area and said, oh, here, we have this, do you need it? So also reaching out to the other theaters in your area, and frankly, like universities, art centers, not necessarily movie theaters, but other places that may have those digital projectors, and find out when they're upgrading and see if you could be the recipient of their often gently used projector. So that also really helped us.
From our point of view, having opened the first theater in 2010, we had a lot of experience with doing grant writing. And we hired along the way a grant writer. And the result of that was we wound up with good grants from the Knight Foundation, which is headquartered in Miami. And the president of the Knight Foundation is a member of the cinema. So you can imagine that being in that community, we're not the only benefactor. Every arts organization in the city of Miami and some in South Florida are benefactors of the Knight Foundation. And so that became important. The city donations became important. And we had some pretty large individual donations from private members of the community. When I say large donations, anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000. And so those really count, and it puts you in a position where you can make some choices, as opposed to, you have to do what you have to do to make it work. So, but I can't imagine having done this in that way when we first opened the theater. It took years for us to create that community. So we're fortunate in that position. We are in the position that Barbara's in with the theater here in Atlanta, the Tara, because it's really it's a startup in this community. And so although it's embraced well by the community because it's been there over 50 years and people will reminisce about it. No, I used to come here when I was a kid. And giving money to it is another story. And also there's a peculiar situation here in Atlanta, and it may be in other communities. It's maybe similar. There are some arts organizations which have banded together some years ago. And when people make donations to to that organization, it sort of takes the air out of anybody else who's trying to raise money. So it becomes a challenge. If they'll say to you, well, I gave to so-and-so and that's it, they're finished. They're not going to give to anything else. They gave to like a community chest type of a thing, which distributes out to the art organizations. And not to every art organization. So it's a little more challenging here, but we are, getting a start. And fortunately, as I said before, there was a lot of infrastructure that was there, so it didn't take us that much to get it open.
One other thing I'll say about, because I've just looking through the attendees and having spoken with some of you separately about opening a venue. When I worked out of the Michigan Theater, I experienced a very traditional capital campaign where there was, a significant amount of the raise prior to the public phase of the campaign, several very large gifts, anchor gifts, and sort of like the downstream from there, which is like a really luxurious place to be, right? Like that kind of strategy. For Vidiots, we really we did receive several gifts over $100,000, but our average gift size was $5,000. So we raised about $2 million off of $5,000 gifts, which is a lot of people. And that is like Maggie spending 4 years of her life just calling every single person who, had been with Vidiots, new Vidiots, everything like that, and just really hustling. And so for organizations that are smaller or maybe don't have a large development department, for 3 years, it was just Maggie and myself. And then in the last year, we brought on a third person. We have a board of directors, of course, but just from a paid staff perspective. And it's really only in the last 3 months that we've gone from about 4-ish people. And only one of them is full-time, that was Maggie, to, now we have about 30 people once you add in our front of house staff and everything. So it can be done with a very tiny organization if you just, and it can also be done primarily through small gifts. It's not easy. It's definitely hard, but if you're committed and you have a great story to tell, I think that's what is really important, right? Is having that executive director who has a vision, can get out there in the community, and no matter who walks in the room, like they're just a person who can, bring you into the space and get you really excited about it. We also brought people into the space at every phase. So when we first got the building, when we took everything out of the building, when we knocked all the walls down, and just really brought people in as much as possible, because that really sold people. Once they were in the space and could either see the drawings or hear Maggie describe the vision for the space, that really swayed a lot of people. So also thinking about, in some ways, a 2-year construction period was beneficial for us in terms of fundraising, because we were able to give a lot of tours. And then also the community drove past the theater under construction for so long that they would always stop in and ask questions. And so by the time we opened, it was, people were really hungry for it.
We have a question in the chat that I'm hoping maybe one of you will be able to answer. It says, can you talk about fundraising options for a theater venture that is for a for-profit business, but is employee owned and employee governed? The challenge is that investors cannot own shares since the company is employee owned. So any for-profit fundraising options?
That's a tough one. That's definitely a tough one. But if the fundraising is for a specific venue that has some connection to the community, you're appealing to the emotional connection to the community and to what the mission is. And so whether it's a profit or a nonprofit maybe doesn't take on the same significance it might otherwise. And so telling you, as you said, your story and what makes it compelling to the person that you're trying to communicate with, I think kind of like is the way around it. It's a nonprofit or it's a profit. And that would be my approach at it.
I would agree. And also I would say, like, the real difference, right, is like giving to a nonprofit, you get a tax deduction. But other than that, it's the same process, right? You're still giving, as Stephen is saying, to a community-based organization. It's still about the story, your emotional connection. And so if the gift is $5,000, like, I don't know about you, but like, I mean, like, it's a struggle for me to hit the 12. I'm like, I never go above my like 12,000 standard deduction, right? So depending on who you're looking for, maybe some of those $100,000 gifts from private individuals might not be there for you because they are giving such a significant amount. They really are looking for a tax deduction. But if you're prioritizing smaller gifts where maybe the tax deduction isn't as big of a deal to them, then I think you're really focused on that emotional and that core storytelling. But also you can still do things like adopt a seat, adopt a space, put your name, none of that. You don't have to be a nonprofit to run a seat campaign or to put someone's name, over the box office, or, in our case, we also had people adopt sections of the video store. I think like leaning into the fact that you are employee owned is really interesting, and leaning into what that means and how their gift, because it is still a gift, how their gift is supporting these employees, but also supporting the community, and supporting this interesting model and structure that you've developed. That's what I would go for.
I also, I'm not quite sure why you wouldn't want to explore a nonprofit, because if the employees became employees of the nonprofit, they would still be able to make their living from it. And then you'd be able to qualify for, when you have a long lease, you can get state funding for cap grants and that sort of thing. And you have a lot of doors open for you. So even though yeah, you don't own the theater, then it's a community project, but you can still make a living from it as a director, executive director, or whatever your role is at the theater. So I would seriously urge whoever the folks are to consider 501. Yes, it's a little bit of a problem to create a 501. It takes a little time. Got to meet certain criteria, but I would say without the 501, it's more challenging. If your goals are less demanding, maybe that's okay. But if you're going to build a building or you have a new venue that you're trying to equip, being a 501 has its advantages, and not so much from private donors as grants.
Yes, I would also say that this is where Brock would be really helpful because his organization is Texas Theaters for Profit, but the Oak Cliff Film Festival is a nonprofit. And there is, I believe, the building itself, the Texas Theater, is owned by a nonprofit. It's just that the Texas Theater operates inside of it. So there's also an opportunity there to pair sort of a Friends of Your Theater, which is a nonprofit focused on the historic rehabilitation of your space. Let's say it's historic or a new space. Alternatively, if you're just like, we don't believe in the nonprofit model, that's not our thing, you could again have an investor pool with the building, and then they could long-term lease or slowly sell the building to the employee, right? Like there are different, it does not need to be your employee-owned organization that owns or renovates the building. You could have a dual structure, and a number of organizations work like that. It's tricky, but it's, there are ways around it. I would reach out to the Texas Theater and talk to Barack as like a starting point for that.
And I think too, depending on your municipality and your county, there are sometimes economic development programs that are for, employee owned, woman owned, minority owned, that they may be able to give you a grant of some sort as well. It's worth just checking in with them and asking. We have another question, and I'm so sorry, it was at the top of the list. Can you discuss how to budget for new build? Where do you start?
There are some numbers out there. If you do the research, you're going to find that you can get average costs per square foot for construction for theaters. There's research to be done on the internet. And of course, it depends on region and availability of labor in your territory and so forth, and the interest on the part of a contractor, whether the job is big enough to get their attention, or maybe it's too small and you can't get what you want in the way of bids. There are variations on the theme, but I think if you're ready to do the research on the internet, you can get some pretty good idea what your construction costs are going to be. It's certainly easier for the CF&E than for the building because regional differences are so great. And I think right now, at least in this area, we're probably running around $200 a square foot. That's basic construction.
It's so funny you say that because I just multiplied that by our square footage, and that's about how much money we've spent on the build out.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's also because we still owe, we're not done paying people. But I would also say, getting with an architect and a contractor as early as possible, right? They're going to really help. They're going to bring that expertise of what the budget is. And I would look for an architect who has experience with a movie theater, because there are a lot of unique things, particularly when you get into the booth, or like seating layout and, certainly concession stand, just flow, that type of thing. So having an architect who understands, what a theater actually needs and how it operates on a day-to-day, because otherwise you'll end up with, designs that are really beautiful but maybe focus on the wrong principles. So that was really important for us with our architect, was that he had that understanding of movie theater flow. And so was able to bring kind of those beautiful architectural elements to it, but also just fundamentally understood that this is a place that, we're looking to get 271 people in there as frequently as we can for as many sold out shows as we can. And, beer and wine's got to flow quickly. People have to get popcorn and they got to get in the theater. So I would, start talking with general contractors and architects almost before you really get too detailed on your budget, and let them drive that conversation with you. And maybe also your AV
Oh.
person. That was kind of, for us, it was general contractor, architect, and then our AV person. And together, because our AV person, Paul Smith, really brought a lot of the understanding of what the booth needs were and what the, needs were across the space. So that was important as well.
I would say that the order of things is, if you have local architect, you're going to have to engage wherever you are. You may not be able to find an architect with experience in theater locally. So best to find that architect and work with someone you're comfortable with, but have them engage a consultant who might or may not be an architect, but at least they know everything there is to know about building a movie theater. So, and there are a number of consultants out there who do that kind of work, and they specialize in it. So now you're building a team. Now you have the architect, you have the consultant who knows all about theaters, and now you're looking for a general contractor. Now that team can really put it together. The key to all of it, from my experience, is that the owners, the people who are the operators, are the ones who are going to drive what's going to happen. So if you can convey what it is that the mission is with your venue, with your project, to your team, and they're going to be able to execute it for you in such a way that it's not going to break the bank. And I think that's the key element, is if they understand what you're trying to do and how that fits in with your future and of your organization, that's going to be the key elements.
Question we received via email is, does anyone have experience with adding an elevator in a large old building while the theater is operating? And I guess to that end, do you have experience building things out while the theater is operating in general? And how do you deal with that?
Our experience has been always, when it came to an elevator or a handicap lift, that it was done before we opened the front door. I can't even imagine having to do it otherwise.
Yeah, we don't have one. Our second floor is inaccessible, but also really the only public space is 2 additional bathrooms on the second floor. So we don't have that experience either.
Well,
I would imagine it probably need to close for a little while. That seems challenging to do it while open.
Yeah, even just for maintenance, I would imagine it's a challenge to do that while you're open. And you want your space to be accessible when the public is there at all times, right? If anyone else has a question, feel free to pop it in the chat. We are running up on 10 till. And so we can wrap up shortly unless anyone else has a question.
Kevin has a question about refitting the theater for immersive experience use.
Ooh,
Also, we did not do that in our space. So I don't have that experience. But I do, there was a theater here in LA, the Downtown Independent, that I believe is closed, that had done that. But Stephen, have you done much, like the screens that you add to the sides?
Yeah, we have a little bit experience, but not with our venues. Through my business, we have some experience with the Barco Space program and others which are similar. We have not found any place that we have worked these things where it made such a difference in the operation that it paid to do it. And so as a consequence of it, there's very few places which are successful who employ that technology. It's very expensive to do that. And if it's an art theater or if it's an independent house, it's probably you want to look at where you're putting your resources.
Did either of you make considerations for other types of events other than movie screenings when you were doing your build outs?
In all of our venues where we are operating, we're doing live performance also. So whether it's live theater performance, even if it's electronic, by way of, let's say, London Theatre, or an actual live performance of music in the venue, that's a pretty important component. And just in general, renting your facility outside of the normal use, it can create a revenue stream which is challenging for you. It'll challenge you not to rent. It becomes so lucrative sometimes that you want to take a show out so that you can rent the theater. The fear, of course, is that you get the wrath of the distributors after you by doing that.
Yeah, we could never be open to the public and make more money. Probably 5 times as much money annually based on private rentals. They really are. But again, that's not what our mission is, right? So it's really supplementary. And so it's challenging, though, to have that balance. For us, we don't have a stage, but again, we have that significant space down front. So it's, we could do risers down front and create that. But also we didn't have the resources to fully outfit everything. So instead, Paul Smith went through and like cited certain outlets, dropped certain wires in places so that as we grow, we can add things like Zoom cameras so we can do better like Q&As, recordings, that type of thing. One quirky little thing that like our sound system is throughout the entire building. And so you can isolate it in a specific zone, but we could also have something that's been really helpful for us as we get people used to showing up on time, because we do not do 20 minutes of trailers. We typically show 1 or 2 trailers before the movie starts, and then it's going. And so a lot of people in our area are used to the AMCs, and so they show up 20 minutes late. And so as we're getting people used to it, people linger in the lobby. And so we use our lobby system, right? Like we do an intro before every film, and we just pipe that into the lobby. And it's a good way to like get people to, and sometimes we pipe it into the video store. So if people are lingering in there before the movie starts. But yeah, we thought a lot about, we're really set up like we could do small live performances, comedy shows, podcast recordings, those types of things. But that's really for 2024. Kind of the next 6 months is just dialing into the cinema, just the regular movie going experience. Getting that ironed out.
All right, we've got a couple last questions. Hopefully we can knock them out. Any thoughts on Dolby Atmos for smaller theaters, 75 to 132 seats?
Expensive. Expensive, and you have to be able to close the theater down to do it. It's not a quick do, especially working in the ceiling. That ceiling is the key to the system too. Those venues that have it love it, and I would consider it if you're building a new space. Definitely, it's much easier when you're building than try to come back and do it later.
Did either of you approach corporate or institutional partners for sponsorship or funding?
Yes, we definitely approach corporations, but again, about a quarter, maybe even a fifth of our funding came from, maybe even less than that. Honestly, now I'm really thinking about the numbers. Maybe a sixth of our funding came from companies. The overwhelming majority of it for the capital campaign came from individuals. Now, as we're shifting into year round, of course, like sponsorship, private event rentals, we do a lot of promotional screenings here in Los Angeles, for your consideration screenings, those types of things, because we're in the LA market. And so then that is shifting the revenue a little bit. So that is where we're seeing the corporate money coming from the marketing departments. But for the capital campaign, it was primarily individuals. We didn't do much institutional funding. We weren't really eligible for a long time in the city of Los Angeles or the county of LA for grants because we weren't open. We did just receive finally a COVID relief grant. The county of LA was really delayed in releasing its funds. So we were able to receive that. And now we're getting into a cycle of grants and things like that. But HFPA has supported us, or what is it now? Now it's called the Golden Globes, just organization. And then also actually NATO of California and Nevada through their film foundation has given us a grant 2 years in a row. So those are kind of like our institutional partners.
We're really more involved in sponsorships and underwriting with programming than anything else, I would say. And they're not large companies. They're usually just local companies who will agree to underwrite a series that we have, or are regular supporters of the theater, and they get a slide on the screen, that sort of thing. For the major funding, no, it's mostly grants or large gifts that are really turning the wheels on that.
All right, and how about this will be our last one, I think. We are looking at converting our used balcony into a second screen. Do you have any background with this or any challenges that we should be aware of?
Happens all the time. We just completed one at the Plaza Theater here in Atlanta.
So I think Stephen dropped out, but so as Stephen was saying, they just did it at the Plaza Theater with Chris. There you go.
You're back.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know what happened. Anyway, yeah, we have quite a bit of experience in the balcony conversions, and sometimes it works well, sometimes not. It depends. I think from time to time, the people who own theaters get overly ambitious about what they can accomplish. And so the biggest challenges are making the fire department happy and the city department with life safety and health issues, ingress, egress, sight lines. You start putting walls up, and you got soundproofing issues. It goes on and on and on. Can be done. And to take a single screen theater and turn it into a 5-screen theater without changing the outside walls, it's pretty challenging, but it can be done.
Again, the Texas Theater, I would reach out to Barack. They've just finished. Like I think they've just finished this. They underwent that process for quite some time. But I would also strongly advise that, like, if you're going to do it right. When I worked at the Michigan Theater, we had the State Theater, which had been twinned in the 80s, and you would sit like with your shoulders this way, like your body was this way and the screen is this way, and so you're like twisted in your seat slightly, and then the other twin was the opposite way. So really be mindful that if you're doing it, you're gonna need to reseat, you're gonna need to, again, the sight lines, that sort of thing. So if you're going to do it well. Otherwise, it may not be, people might not enjoy sitting up there, being in that space. And then that would kind of be a waste.
Well, thank you both for being here and answering all of these questions and talking about these projects. I hope that we didn't, relitigate any stress for you, given all things. I just want to thank you all for being here. Folks on the webinar, if you have any more questions, there was a link to a question form in the email that I sent this morning. I can share those with the panelists if they would like to answer any more of those. I can share that as well. This has been recorded and it will be available to members only. Get everyone to sign up for AHC later, soon, once it's done rendering and the captions are done. Thank you so much, Barbara and Stephen. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you everyone for listening in. And I'm happy to answer any other questions or forward them on to the respective person at our organization.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting. Thanks for inviting me to participate. I'm happy to answer any questions later that anybody might happen to have. Well, I'll try to answer them. I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. And want to thank everybody for being so pleasant about all of this and putting it together and giving everybody an opportunity to exchange. These ideas are all important.
We'll
Thank
build
you.
it together. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.